my quote in the report on the product problem was one I had to read back and think, what was I saying here? But actually,
Fans are getting older, and the next generation mostly isn't following. Can racing find a new generation before the existing one is gone?
geez, I had to replay it about 5 times, thinking this must be AI. One off
I always joke about that, Tweed in a flat cap. And I know it's not all that anymore, but you still do see it quite a lot. And hello and welcome to The Attention Shift. If you're enjoying the show, hit like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and hit the notification bell to never miss an episode. It helps more than you know. So, this week, we're looking at horse racing, one of the world's oldest sports, and right now, we're at one of the most critical points in the sport's history. Its fans are getting older, and the next generation mostly isn't following. The industry employs thousands and turns over billions, however, but the aging audience that pays for all of this is not necessarily being replaced. Can racing find a new generation before the existing one is gone? A new report from inside the industry says yes, but only if the sport changes fast. Joining us today, I'm delighted to say, is one of the men who led that work, Sam Houlding, MD of B2B at Spotlight Sports Group. Sam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ed. Pleasure to be here.
Sam, I think what would be useful to give some context to the people watching and listening is if you could give a little bit of background about yourself and also Spotlight Sports Group in terms of what is the work that you're involved in.
Yeah, absolutely fine. So I've been at Spotlight Sports Group for 16 years, a lifetime, Ed, a working lifetime by some people's standards anyway. But I've been at Spotlight Sports Group for 16 years. I've worked in various commercial capacities here, always with our industry partnerships in mind. So I head up our B2B division, which is effectively all of our partnerships within the industry. At Spotlight Sports Group, as you know, Racing Post is one of our main brands, our flagship brand. And we do a ton of work across both B2C, our own audiences, where we curate all of our data and content and serve it up for all our horse racing audience, predominantly UK and Ireland when it comes to B2C channels. But then what we also do is we take that data and that content, we package it, and we work with racing data, but also a load of sports data and content with partners globally to help them engage their own audiences as well. So we're across many different markets from a B2B perspective, but really the heart of the business is the same across everything we do. It's about audience engagement.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it was interesting. I was reading Mark Renshaw's forward in this as well, and I like how he said that, the racing product is genuinely extraordinary, especially live. And from my own personal perspective, I absolutely concur with him. And I've been lucky enough to meet Mark on one of my horse racing trips to Saudi Arabia, and I've been to racing in the UK, Saudi, the US. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any way, shape or form in horse racing. I just love the experience of horse racing. But he also goes on to say that the industry very much has been resting on the heritage rather than asking about sort of hard questions. Because I often find that when I go to the racing, and there's bits I understand, but there's lots I don't, and it can be very, I guess, if you're not an expert in it, trying to understand the sport in itself can be difficult because of all the different acronyms and the ways that things are described. It's not obvious to a nascent race goer what's actually going on other than horses going past, obviously, the winning post.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned at the very beginning there the different countries where you've been racing, and I guarantee the experience was very different.
Totally different. Different. Yeah.
The way they talk about racing, some of the terminology attached was different. So, yeah, racing is a fantastic global sport, and it's like very few sports where it kind of transcends different countries. But in all of the kind of, I guess, various aspects of racing, there is a lot of heritage. It's a heritage sport in many ways, and it probably has rested on that for a long time. I suppose that brings us back to why we felt it was really important to do this report. And bringing new audiences to the sport is what we live and breathe in our DNA at Racing Post, and we wanted to widen that discussion to frame the opportunity around new audiences for the sport, because the lifeblood of new fans into the sport, like every sport out there, is going to dictate the success of its future.
So I guess for context of people watching and listening then, where does racing's audience actually sit today, and I guess how big do you think it could realistically be?
Yeah, we drew on, and what we were really keen to get into in the report was quantification with data. So credible data sources and pieces of research out there, and layering in real expert industry opinions. So we got some of the biggest voices in the game within the report as well. The data sources we used, just to kind of, preface this conversation, were really credible. PwC, Two Circles, GWI, Project Beacon, our own in-house research. And we use those to quantify exactly what you've asked there. The kind of the size of the prize for racing. So the report identifies that it currently sits at 36 to 48 million people as a global fan base. I'm going to talk globally here. There's core fans of 6 to 8 million, which when we say core fans are those really loyal racing loving fans that are going to come back to the sport time and time again no matter what. And then there's a big pool of casual fans of kind of 30 to 40 million. And they would be fans that engage with many different sports, but are quite, easily drawn to racing. They're a racing enthusiast and they've got quite strong knowledge. So that's the kind of 36 to 48 million pool, which we know we service very well across racing. What the report really highlighted outside of that is that there's a further potential to grow the racing fan base by 200 million fans, and it carves this up quite neatly into sports fans. So fans that are following sports but haven't really discovered racing properly yet, or they have a limited interest, and what we called in the report entertainment and big event fans, which would be about 60 to 80 million as an opportunity, and they would be an audience segment that is drawn to significant entertainment events, fashion, music, hospitality, and again could quite easily be swung by racing if they discovered the sport.
And I guess where I mean, I've certainly attended a few of these as well, where you get that crossover where you pair together racing with live music. I went last year and saw Texas play live after the racing itself. And look, and I was equally interested in both. And I guess you might have a view on when people do, like, are people more interested in the music when they go to that and just happen to go to the racing, or actually is both things a pull?
I think what we identified in the report is that in the big event fans, which is what we're talking about there, which are, let's say half the 200 million opportunity, that entertainment as a whole is the pull, and they will discover the sport through that entertainment vehicle. So places like, I don't know where you would have seen Texas necessarily, but the Melbourne Cup have done this really well in recent years. It's almost like an entertainment event, and it leads with that. It has, DJs in and loads of different things going on to draw people in, and then they discover the sport. So I think that's probably the way that discoverability in that segment will happen the most.
It certainly worked for me, and I've heard a lot. I know lots of people that wouldn't necessarily be attracted to horse racing per se that have gone to horse racing because of something like that's been attached to it, but then have enjoyed the horse racing aspect of it and get exposed to something they wouldn't do normally. So look, it's pretty unique that I think that horse racing has done that, and it certainly worked. And you see it happens a lot in F1 these days, and like the whole, it was on the news this weekend, right? We just had Silverstone, whereby a lot of people are going to that. Yeah, they're going to the F1 racing, but they're going for everything else that's going on around it too, because the racing itself happens for relatively small windows, and you need other things to do when you're there as well. So that entertainment factor is clearly an important part of that mix.
Yeah, really is. But we're talking about kind of live entertainment there, as well. And obviously in the modern day and age of sport and sport consumption, it's really important to bring that digital experience to life as well. And some of that live entertainment can then, create that. I think Tom mentions in the report, the editor of the Racing Post, the virtuous circle of you create the experience that then kind of generates more content on social media, and then, it's a virtuous circle with engagement. But we know that's the kind of the battlefield where most sports are playing nowadays. I think there was a stat in the report that said 70% of 18 to 44-year-olds sports fans follow teams or athletes on social media. 52% follow 11 or more sports. So we know it's a really competitive digital playing field, where racing has to modernise.
So I think there probably is a challenge, right? And you'll definitely know more than me around racing characters and that followability across social media. So you've talked in the report that racing doesn't necessarily have a product problem per se, but what do you mean? I guess what is the issue then? Because like I said, the product in itself when you go to live is not the problem, but how is then that manifesting itself then digitally and through these different cultural platforms like social media? How do you create the characters?
Yeah, my quote in the report on the product problem was one I had to read back and think, what was I saying here? But actually, but no,
I've done that loads of times.
What I was saying is that racing as a sport is relatively simple when you think about it. You know, you have horses at a start line, first past the post is the winner. So as a sport and a concept, it's not too difficult to understand, but we can complicate it quite heavily with lots of terminology and making the sport quite difficult to access and understand when you are there at the races or you are looking at a card or form. So what I was trying to, explain there is that to reach that 200 million, and that's the important number here, we know we have to have kind of cleaner, stronger narratives around racing, and we know we have to demystify the sport when people do find it as well. So it is easy to access, it is easy to understand. And I think they're two really important things that racing has to bear in mind. In particular, if you think about how people digest sport nowadays, football, is a good example. You're following a season-long event, the Premier League. The winner is the one with the most points at the end of the season. Racing and racing events arrive almost in isolation without any kind of pre-context.
Yeah, you're right. There are. You like every so often you hear about the champion jockey and things like that, but it's almost like I wouldn't know where to go and find who's keeping track of that or what is a league system. And the reality is when you start to do leaderboards and things like that, you are then gamifying that experience, and that tends to be what people like to lean into.
Yeah, it's difficult to do with racing because we are dealing with equine athletes rather than human athletes. So you can't just say, right, this is your schedule, you're going here and here.
And suddenly they get pulled out for a variety of reasons when you think they were going to...
Yeah. So there is difficulties in creating that, but the season-long narratives are often kind of secondary to the actual one-off racing events. There's some places that do it really well. Cheltenham in the UK is almost a crescendo. Cheltenham and Aintree are crescendo of the jump seasons. Japan do a really good pyramid system with like finals. The Breeders' Cup do a kind of challenge series, which runs globally as well. So some do it well, but those narratives are still a bit hidden compared to the on-the-day, one-off narratives that we push around racing.
Yeah, I wasn't... And again, I only knew how popular horse racing was in Japan because, like I said, I've been lucky enough to spend time with like Mark and other people in and around the horse racing industry. But again, that's because I've had access to those senior people around the horse racing industry. I think as a punter, I would have never known that horse racing is so strong in Japan and there are things like that going on there.
Yeah. And look, it's not just Japan. It's the same as many territories. We're quite... I think in racing, we're quite focused on our own territory because lots of the commercial structure runs around that territory. It's media rights, it's betting, and it's live attendance, in-event attendance in that particular country, focused on their particular style of racing. So, what I think is a really big opportunity to hit that kind of 200 million fan base and unlock it is stronger, globally unified narratives.
So what does a season-long, I guess, racing story actually look like in practice? Then how would you, with such fragmentation across the sport, not just like saying one territory but multiple territories, what does that look like in practice? How could you potentially bring it together? And is some of this blue sky thinking, or is some of these conversations going on behind the scenes? I imagine some you can talk about, some you can't. Right? Are there lots of conversations going on about this at the moment in the sport where people are trying to think of how this becomes a reality?
I think if there are, they're relatively narrow. And I think there are definitely attempts to push more global narratives. We've got so many good, big festivals and some kind of alignment. I mean, Felicity, the CEO at Ascot, said it really well in the report. But, alignment between some of these major festivals in terms of the narrative is really important. We have the events there. Can we kind of link them up a little bit more? But you do have instances where... the Hong Kong Jockey Club has developed Whirlpool, and there is the Whirlpool kind of series of races that run across the globe through the year, what they've kind of done is unify the back end products and the liquidity from a betting perspective that goes into those events. Maybe as a front end experience, there's more that racing could do there. Bringing that narrative to life from a consumer, an audience perspective. Whirlpool might mean a bit to you if you're really kind of into the betting side of racing. It might not mean as much to you if you go along and you're not. So
I know what you mean.
The sport does have, and the raw elements are there. It's probably a little bit blue sky thinking at the moment in terms of how we as a sport join those together more.
I understand, because you look at Whirlpool, and I think when you go to the races as well, and obviously you'll see more about Whirlpool. I think where it became really obvious to me is when I went to Santa Anita in LA, and they really did push Whirlpool while we were there as well because of all the things going on. But I think, like I said, if you're a casual fan and you don't know who the jockeys are, you don't know who the horses are. And the reality is not everyone knows how to read form. I've certainly tried plenty of times and I can't read form, even though my granddad tried to teach me as a child. Not sure if that was good or a bad thing. But the reality is, if you're not relying on form, then the reality is you are going to rely on characters about who you decide to take a punt on. And look, and it's not all about betting. Some of that might just be gamified ways of taking a punt that's not necessarily spending money on betting, because betting's not for everyone, and we're not necessarily suggesting that. Like, how can something like Whirlpool lean more into those characters so that people can start to follow them more as like an individual horse or an individual jockey?
Yeah, Winfred in the report said it really well, the CEO of Hong Kong Jockey Club. And they have a stat that there's more engagement in racing if you lead with the sport rather than lead with betting. So you have to lead with those sporting elements, but demystifying that for first-time consumers, new audiences, which is obviously where the major opportunity is for racing, is massively important. Like I said before, it's simple. It doesn't have a core product problem necessarily. It's first past the line wins the race. But just taking away some of the complexity in terminology and thinking about things like how do we get, maybe data-led race card that's simpler to understand, ranking systems. People understand things like that now when they consume sports, like very easy to understand, digestible visuals when it comes to a race card. And maybe it's more powerful than form. Like you said, you sound quite seasoned in terms of going racing.
I try.
Still wouldn't necessarily be able to digest the form. Worked in racing for a long time, but all of the form elements in every territory, I would be a bit lost in as well.
Yeah, I'll look at form. I'll look at. I try to make it look like I know what I'm doing, but I don't really. But I always I try and take a punt based on the very limited knowledge I've got, and then try and stick to it, and then that's my day. But I think even race rituals, is a clever way of how you can actually get people to really understand the meaning of the race, whether you're going or not. And I think. Yeah. Like the report identifies a clear mismatch between how modern audiences consume sports, even live their lives right, and forms of media racing that racing actually prioritises. Like, what does that look like? What is that mismatch, do you think?
I think the mismatch that we're trying to draw out in the report is that if we're going to grow new audience, and I keep coming back to that because that's the most important thing, that 200 million,
of course,
that is the opportunity. We know that audience lives on mobile, predominantly in the evening, and they want, easy content to digest, ideally short form. Whereas racing's product lives on a race card largely, and when it does live on mobile, it's often, run by internal racing voices that are steeped in that terminology and that complexity and that, one-off isolation.
I always joke about that, Swede in a flat cap. And I know it's not all that anymore, but you still do see it quite a lot. I don't think it necessarily... And I've seen some younger, even content creators, almost leaning into that more. And I'm thinking, I think you need to sort of be stepping away from not leaning more into it. But, look, each to their own.
Yeah. And look, the stats in the report, support it. But we know that kind of 86%, I think there was a stat in there, of the racing audience is mobile first. So quite clearly we have to meet consumers that are on social platforms and mobile first with content that is relevant, and content that allows them to discover the sport, not kind of make them think, what's this, and scroll on past it, you know.
Yeah. So I guess, look, I know that I'm very much aware of what Spotlight does. Aside from Racing Post, you've got lots of digital products and services, right, that you work with a variety of people across the industry. How is Spotlight specifically approaching closing that gap for the different partners you work with in the industry?
Oh yeah, so we put loads of effort into ensuring that we invest heavily in content that meets new audiences. Effectively, exactly what I mentioned there. I think firstly from helping our partners, we've developed products recently like our Smart View race card, and like I talked about earlier, that's based on rankings. It's based on kind of clean, color-coded visualization, so completely transforms the race card for a first-time user. It's not something we just made up. You know, it went through loads of user testing, and it's very easy to digest. You get a kind of percentage score against each horse, and you can have a view on a race very easily without having to know too much about that particular
Sounds
race.
ideal for me.
Yeah. It's a good product as well, you know. We've taken, in a way, it's taking all the complex data that we use across race cards anyway, but just breaking it down to get the user a little bit further along the journey.
I think that's the beauty
same outcome.
Yeah, that's the beauty sometimes of, you know, technology and data. I think often people then use that to overcomplicate things, but it sounds like what you try to do is like take the other way and simplify it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it wouldn't just be the race card. We invest really heavily, and it's part of kind of a big 3-year audience plan here at Racing Post in social content. We've done partnerships with influencers on there, influencers I've never even heard of that you know are involved in fashion or you know cooking or whatever it is, to take them to live racecourse experiences and have them record and publish content about that to reach their audiences. So we're doing loads of work in that sphere, loads of short form video, which is becoming more and more important. Attention span, attention spans are not high nowadays, are they, for people? Like I said, it's a competitive playing field. So all of our work at Spotlight Sports Group with Racing Post is about new audiences and how we engage them.
I think I think it's a mix, right? I think people will engage with long form content if it's the right long form content. But the reality is I think, like, you're absolutely right that I think racing has always had long form content, right? And actually, what it's probably lacked is that short form content. It's not like it's not happening. People are doing it now, have been doing it for a few years now, but it wasn't necessarily built for that. And you can see that's the kind of stuff that you're trying to do now. Interestingly, I think you've already touched on it, but I'd love to learn more about like what you see as the best comparison to horse racing in other sports. What are the models that you've been looking at where you say, oh, actually, these are things that other sports where we can look at what they've done, might have different demographics, might have different sort of schedules, but things that you feel you can learn from and actually take that into horse racing?
Yeah, I suppose the best sports to look at are heritage sports, or what, you know, traditional heritage sports.
Who've had to go through a change themselves.
Yeah, things like, you know, cricket have been, you know, they've been through tons of changes. If you think about, you know, Test cricket, that's a heritage sport. They've developed loads of different formats. I'm not saying formats are necessarily the way that, you know, new formats are necessarily the way that racing has to go. But you look at their sport and they've developed, you know, things like the 100, where it's broken down the complexities of cricket. It's not talking about overs and you have to understand there's 6 balls in an over or anything like that. It's 100 balls, most runs wins. It simplifies it. You know, alongside what they've done there, they've brought in partnerships that are going to appeal to younger audiences and new audiences. Things like, I think they did a partnership with Marvel, and they wove like superheroes, you know, into the narrative for the day. So they're a great example. Everyone draws on the Formula One example. I like the Formula One example where they kind of centralised all the data, media rights. Every team has a social channel, and they created consistency across the sport. And obviously it worked beautifully. But the only caveat I always have when drawing that example is there's very few races in a season. You've got 20 odd races. Actually it's quite an easy one to then go race to race to race and have a really good global narrative across. So if you can't do that in Formula One, I think you'd be struggling to do it anyway. So for me, there's some really good examples out there. I think it's taking the things they do well, rather than taking a playbook from another sport and just saying that works for racing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because like you said, F1 has, 20-odd races, and I don't know, could you even put a number on how many horse races go on around the world per year? It must be in the high thousands, I'd imagine.
Yeah. I wouldn't have an answer for that now, but
I'm not putting you on the spot. Yeah, it would be a high number.
It'll be the very high thousands, yeah, for sure.
But yeah, like I say, it is a good comparison. Look, I want to try and sort of, because I think it is important, the live experience where we know that racing gets it right. And look, like I said, I can vouch for that, because I've been to plenty, and we've even been having a conversation with some of my work colleagues recently, because we used to do it. It used to be my thing that every year I'd drag everyone out for our summer jaunt to a race course, and we've not done it for a few years. And a few of my more recent colleagues were like, "Oh, can we go to the races?" Because
those new fans coming, Ed.
Yeah. No, I've already promised, so I'm going to do it. I just need to get myself organised. But you know, it is a live experience. So how, I guess, the sport gets that right in so many ways, on so many levels, and I think that when you do get those younger audiences there, they have a great experience. So how do we take that as a door opener to then maintain them from a digital perspective thereafter?
Well, that's the access point for a lot of young people in racing, and it's probably not all racing as well. It's probably those big events, and I mentioned earlier, around the Melbourne Cup, but you've got other examples: the Kentucky Derby, Royal Ascot. They're all posting peak figures for their live events over recent years, but they are being turned into those entertainment and cultural experiences. So it goes back to that first point, I guess, that we were discussing, that if you mix the two and you use that as an access point to get younger people discovering racing, but maybe a soft discovery, through entertainment first, that's the point where we then need to have really good products in place to help keep them engaged in the future as well.
Yeah, it's interesting about, like I said, I wasn't aware of the Melbourne Cup, and also this, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the France's Galop, and they feature heavily in your case studies. What do they each do that the rest of the industry should be copying? Because I've touched on, obviously, like I said, I've been to the races to see live music, and I've been to the race to see the racers. Like, what are they doing differently, specifically, that is, let's say, bigger and better than the norm?
They're playing to their strengths, I think, and I think that's the really important thing when you come to, considering how any racing event evolves. The Melbourne Cup is almost positioned now as a carnival, a major entertainment event. They make sure that they also cater for all of their audience. I know I've talked about a lot about new fans here, but there's still that 48 million or 46 million of core fans.
Can't forget about them,
fans.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So it's not a one-size-fits-all experience. You still have to make sure that you are catering for people that love racing and are going to go and like the heritage of it. That's important. But they both play to their strengths. The Melbourne Cup, like I said, there's other events that do it globally really well as well, but it's almost carnival-led atmosphere. The French example that we draw on there targets young Parisians coming after work. So, it knows where its strengths lie. It has good admission pricing, and it's kind of made sure that its key events, some of the group races have been moved so that the audiences that come on those days after work on Thursdays for the evening summer racing are going to see top quality racing as well. Yeah,
ultimately, that's reality. There are so many things we can do in our day-to-day lives now that I think it's obvious but clever to work around people's schedules and put those things in place. Because the reality is like what you want to do is people have their day-to-day, but you want them to start building rituals around horse racing as well as part of their life. So it's like, the reality is you've got to try and fit it in around people's lives rather than put it in a time when it's not going to be convenient.
Alongside 11 sports or more, like I mentioned earlier, over 50% would watch 11 sports or more, and you'd probably be the same. I'd be the same. You'd see, Well,
there's always been that assumption, hasn't there? That if you love that, that's the only thing you love. No, I like football's probably my first love, but then I'll watch cricket. I like going to the horse racing. I'll watch a bit of tennis if it's on. There's other sports that that I enjoy. That it doesn't mean because I'd like that I don't like that. And I would absolutely go to the right horse racing event over a football match if I'm given the right reasons. It's not that just because I pick that I'll never pick that.
And if it's tennis, it's probably Wimbledon or a major event, and that's where I mean, with racing, we have to use those major events as the entry point, and we might have to accept that like someone's going to enter through a fantastic live experience at Royal Ascot. It might not mean racing's their first love forever after that, but we need to make sure that they are exposed in a way that they want to consume the sport for as long as they are going to be engaged.
And hopefully when they come to that, as much as they want to come to another live event, right, and do it in person, that when they come to that event, they connect with the characters, whether equine or human, and that afterwards they still want to lean in and, okay, I quite liked the personality of that jockey, or I liked how that horse did what that horse did, or I walked around and I saw the horse walking around, that afterwards they feel like I want to keep following that particular character in some way, shape or form, because then it sort of it's that thread that keeps them to the next time that they have a touch point. Yeah,
definitely. And all sport thrives on its superstars, right? That probably comes back to the complexity of we have equine superstars. We also have jockeys and trainers, so we need to make sure that we're bringing out the best of all characters across the sport, really.
But in a lot of ways, if you compare it to something like football, right, and I think that it might not necessarily be thought about that in horse racing. It's only the same as a player, a team, a coach, a manager, a league, a nation. Like, those hierarchies exist in other sports too. I just don't know if they're as interconnected or thought about in the same kind of way in horse racing, that actually it's not one better than other. They're just all parts of the puzzle.
Yeah, and probably a lot of the behind the scenes content is really important in sport. I watched something this morning with the England dressing room, after the Mexico win. It was a great watch. It was only a small snippet
where they were winding up Tuchel about
John Stones'
shoulder.
Exactly.
It was great though. You're absolutely.
There's other things. Anthony Gordon, he did a press conference in Spanish, didn't he? When he got announced to Barcelona, I was sitting there thinking, geez, I had to replay it about 5 times, thinking this must be AI, but no, he speaks Spanish. So just small things like that, and they really hook you in and engage you. But it's that behind the scenes content that's really important as well.
You're right, and those are when you get the cultural and the lifestyle crossovers that actually really pull on people's emotions and really allow them to connect with sports or individuals when they see things like that is not the norm. And I've got no doubt whatsoever that there are stories going on like that in horse racing on a daily basis. Like I said, I love seeing footage of when you're seeing, jockey hands working with horses in the the misty morning, and because you don't see the early morning wake ups and the effort that goes into preparing some of these. Like I said, when I was in Santa Anita, because we were near where the horses were, just to go down and speak to some of the trainers, and it is a unique experience, and you can't get that kind of access in football.
No, exactly, and I think how we solve that is a really key thing.
Yeah.
In the report, we were really conscious of trying to bring in solutions. We've listened to a lot of industry forums that highlight the problems that racing has, in audience. A lot of sports will talk about the same problems, by the way. So, these aren't something we need to kind of
absolutely
panic too much over. But you highlighted them at the beginning. We talk about them, but it's the solutions that are really important, and they're not easy, by the way. And a lot of the time, even thinking about that, how do we bring more behind the scenes narratives to life? But there's no point just telling a ton more stories in isolation as well. So, racing has some challenges there to think about. Is there a way it can do that in a unified way?
Okay, so I wanted to come on to betting, because obviously, look, betting and horse racing are probably more heavily linked together than I think it's fair to say any other sport. But also, horse racing is not just about betting too. All people engage with it in different ways. But the report calls the betting experience one of racing's biggest untapped levers. Now, if I'm just sat here before I read that, I'm thinking to myself, God, betting's everywhere in horse racing. How is that an untapped lever? Can you explain to me how you got to that conclusion?
Yeah, I think probably the way I think about it is that the audience challenge is the thing that sits above everything. we bring the audience, it will funnel new audience into the sport, and it will provide opportunity for the sport to grow. Then you've got 3 levers below that. You've got kind of media rights and how that's monetized. You've got betting, and look, like, it's very clear racing is more dependent on betting in terms of funding the sport than most other sports, so we can't shy away from that. And then you've also got the live experience, people paying to go to a race course. Betting is probably the one that, if done properly and the audience is extended, has the most opportunity to provide future growth for the sport.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's there's a difficulty around the modern audiences, and I guess like because of the way that betting is viewed now. But I think, as you've touched on it, the issue isn't necessarily, again, the problem with betting, or even the UI UX of when you use an app, or I think the race card, I think you touched on it earlier as well, is something that probably informs but probably confuses in equal measures.
Yeah. I think there's a stat in the report. If it's not in the report, then it's definitely a stat that we use, that 31% of sports fans cite feeling informed as their primary trigger to bet. So you can make betting accessible, or you can quite quickly make it inaccessible in horse racing. So racing is very data rich, and presentation of that data is key, and that's where I talked earlier about the Smart View product that we produced, that just simplifies that data experience, allows people to feel informed in a very simple way, using rankings, using data visualization, and giving people access, really. If you feel informed, you're much more likely to place a bet.
Absolutely, and I know that Boyle Sports have adopted that, which clearly shows there's a demand there, and they've identified and understood that there's a solution that's needed to help them do that. How has it specifically worked for them so far? What success has it shown, and since they've adopted it?
Yeah, there's some PR and marketplace around this, actually. So anyone listening can go and have a look as well. But Boyle Sports started using Smart View as one of the various views that they have on their sportsbook, and it worked really well. There was an 8% uplift in bets placed, I think, since its adoption, and it provided a certain segment of the audience that obviously wanted to consume racing in a different way with exactly, the solution that they needed. So it's been a real success, and it's not just Boyle Sports. There's other operators in marketplace that have either adopted it before that or since adopted it, and it continues to be a really powerful product. And I think the more that operators latch on to the fact that you're going to need to provide different experiences for different users, the more Smart View and products like that for new audiences will become more popular as well.
Yeah, and I guess what it shows is it's less about creating new betting products per se in terms of things you can bet on, more about actually giving better information to the people who are interested in the sport, for them to get to lean in and engage with the sport, either through betting or otherwise.
Yeah, back to my product problem. Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. There's no product problem. We need to solve the actual product that we put forward to people. The product of racing is good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
like you say, it's not a presentation in terms of presentation per se, because it's the information to get people. Because I think it even becomes before presentation, right? It's kind of like it's informing and demystifying about the sport to be able to get you to then lean in, because then when you lean in, then the presentation around the sport in the live experience is really, really good.
Yeah, and look, if you went to a first-time football user or football bettor and they weren't too familiar with the sport, and you started talking about XG as your first entry point or something, they think, what the hell's going on here? Starting point is talking about who's going to win the game, and giving a little bit of digestible information that can help people form a view on that. The XG and all the more detailed stuff comes later, once you've discovered it a bit more.
You're right. I think it was in the last World Cup where FIFA came up with a load of new stats that they used during the World Cup, and everyone was looking at the screen going, I don't even know what any of this means, because they'd not gone through that whole process of explaining to people what these different things mean.
Goal involvements and things, and even as a football fan, you have to pause and think, what is this stat I'm looking at here? But racing kind of seems to lean into leading with those stats fairly often, because the form and the data used is relatively complex, I guess, compared to other sports.
Okay, then. So look to wrap up with this, because this has been fascinating, and I definitely am going to speak to you offline about this as well, because I want to learn more about what's going on. There's a structural framework, right? And for whatever reason, things haven't changed. So the report is not calling for a single governing body per se, but it does call for a shared conviction across racing, almost like a shared viewpoint of how do we make change in the sport. What does that actually mean in practice, and what benefits, not just for the organisation involved, but for the fans themselves? Because ultimately, right, all of this is to try and give value to fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is the hardest part to talk about in racing, because it's the most fragmented. We go back to that fact that it's a global sport, but with quite a local mindset. And each local territory has its own way that it governs racing, its own, media rights.
There's no equivalent of a FIFA or a World Athletics or an ICC, for instance.
Yeah, so I think probably in the report, and Mark, our CEO, closes it by explaining that we don't need a single governing body to unlock growth, but like you said, does need a shared conviction. I think probably expecting a single body to be formed of racing might be slightly unrealistic. I might be wrong, and that'd be fantastic if I am. But I think what is really important is if you think about those key entry points that we've talked about there, Ascot, the Melbourne Cup, Breeders' Cup, there'd be too many for me to name, but just pulling out some of the key ones, is that the owners of these events and also, racing bodies globally do work together and share a conviction that there is opportunity if we bring the sport closer together with narratives, with alignment of events, because ultimately, let's go back to the very top of this conversation, 200 million untapped fans. The best way to win those fans over will be presenting the sport as a unified sport that, runs globally. And we could all probably go and attack our own individual territories or countries and make sure we're doing a good job, but that's fragmentation still. So yeah, it's a great question. What does that actually look like? There's definitely a shared conviction needed. Maybe there's an informal body needed to help tackle some of the sports problems, and maybe that's made up of some of the kind of key stakeholders in racing. Some of them commented very well and within the report, and input really well into the report. So maybe some of those are the voices we need as well.
Yeah, and I think that some of the major horse races have come together, certainly from a media perspective, haven't they, to do a joint, a little bit like, in marathons, you've got the marathon majors. I can't remember the name of it now. I know there's a group that have come together to work together for some of the major horse races in terms of how content's made, content's distributed, media is sold. But probably it needs that on a larger scale than just that small number, because there are so many races, right? Yeah,
there's some examples. The European Pattern Committee, one. I mentioned Whirlpool earlier. For me, I see this as the biggest opportunity. There is a unification of major global racing events from a betting perspective, a liquidity perspective. If we could bring that to the front end, and probably blue sky, but say everyone that was hooked into Whirlpool paid into a central marketing fund, and that marketing fund was controlled by a body and then promoted the sport globally via the Whirlpool series events and brought that to life. Maybe that's a solution, but again, it's going to take conviction from the industry and alignment to really unpick that, I think.
Yeah, it feels like there needs to be a thought process there from them, less about what they lose from what exists already, more about what they gain from a wider audience that they could tap into. It feels like there's a bit of protectionism perhaps there at the moment, about worrying that if we're all aiming still for the same audience, then I'm just going to get less of it if I share it, whereas actually what you're aiming for is that top of the pyramid, the 200 plus million, where actually everyone benefits because you're opening it up.
Yeah, and alignment often does mean you have to kind of sacrifice something or control over something in the shorter term for the longer term benefit. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Sam, this has been fascinating. So obviously what we will do is, for anyone who hasn't read the report, and it is a fascinating read, we will make the link available on our webpage, where we will host the podcast as well. But Sam, if you just want to explain where people can go and get the report themselves, if they listen to this and they don't come to our webpage to watch it, please explain, how do we get the report?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Alex, our head of marketing, is going to kill me for not knowing the exact answer or web address. But if you engage with Racing Post Spotlight Sports Group LinkedIn channels, it'll be on there. If you go through the spotlightsportsgroup.com website, I think there's a link on there as well. So if you Google the racing audience report by Racing Post and Spotlight Sports Group, you'll find it. It won't be any issues there.
And I think if anyone in the horse racing industry as well wants to engage with you, Sam, as well, I'm assuming they can find you on LinkedIn as a starting point as well.
Absolutely. Anything we've published in the report, even to obtain a copy, given I've failed to point someone towards a particular destination. But anything regarding the report, more than happy to engage. We are obsessed with audience engagement and growth at Racing Post, so the door's always open, to talk about this stuff.
As are we at Display, which is why it was a good reason to get you on the pod. What we'll also do as well is, obviously, when we edit this video out as well, I'm going to ask Dan, our producer, to also put the web address in the graphic on the video as well, so people know where they can go and get the report from as well. So Alex is then happy, and we'll make sure we'll put a link on the webpage as well.
Sam, keep Alex happy always.
Absolutely. Sam, this has been fascinating. I definitely want to learn more. I definitely am now committed to make sure I do organise a social for all of our staff to some horse racing very soon. But thank you so much for your time. If anyone's got any questions, feedback, want to feature as a guest on the pod, you can email us at hello@attentionshift.media. I've been Ed Abbis. This has been Sam Houlding. This has been The Attention Shift. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Ed.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this. And make sure you smash that bell icon too, so you're always the first to know exactly when a new episode drops.